The series begins on a train running through the Italian Alps. A woman in a red dress brushes against a man while walking past him. When she takes her seat, we see she has his wallet. The man's name is Gregor Jovanovic. The woman is Nadia, and she's a spy, which we learn when she talks to a man named Bernard. Bernard informs her that Gregor is carrying uranium and plans to sell it. A man fiddling with a lighter comes up behind Nadia and asks to take a seat next to her. The banter between them, taking place in multiple languages, shows they know each other quite well. Nadia says she was on this job alone, but Mason says Grace sent him to make sure things go well. As Gregor gets up from his seat, Mason rises to follow, but Nadia pulls him back down into a kiss. He hadn't noticed another man, wearing a tan suit, tailing Gregor. Nadia gets up and follows Gregor. The suited man follows her and Mason turns up behind him. As if on cue, they fight. Meanwhile, Nadia follows Gregor to the restaurant and puts on her red lipstick. She returns Gregor's wallet, pretending she found it fallen on the floor. She invites herself to sit down and has him at gunpoint after a bit of flirting. He recognizes her as Citadel, and she asks him to give her the bag. He says there is no uranium, so instead, they lure Citadel here to send them a message. Meanwhile, Mason's fight with the suited man ends as he kicks him out of a broken window. Gregor shows Nadia a video of a man being beaten and killed. This is then followed by clips of more and more people being killed, presumably being Citadel's agents. He shows her a mark on his wrist, and suddenly the waitstaff in the dining car turn on Nadia. She has her gun taken away as Gregor talks about erasing Citadel for good. He's about to shoot her when Mason enters, offering enough distraction. In the shootout that follows, the pair easily take down all the others, with Nadia getting shot in the process. She tells Mason they're burning Citadel to the ground. In that moment, Mason and Nadia both admit they've lied to each other. They can't get in touch with Bernard, and Gregor, still barely alive, tells them that Manticore will always find them. He pulls out a bomb, and the train explodes. Shift to a hospital in Bellagio, Italy, where Mason wakes up to find his limbs tied to the bed. He screams out for help. A doctor tells him he attacked a surgeon, and he was on a train that exploded, but Mason can't recall. In fact, he can't even recall his name. The doctor tells him his name is Kyle Conroy, showing him his ID and wedding ring. 8 years later in Oregon, Mason or Kyle is living a typical domestic life with a wife and daughter. News reports about explosions trigger some vague memories about Nadia. At therapy, Kyle says he wants to try remembering more about himself for the sake of his daughter. He admits to having visions of a woman on the train with him, so the therapist advises him to try a DNA test to find relatives. In Virginia, UK Ambassador Dahlia tells the US Secretary of State that his CIA have found a case with all of Citadel's most important information. She asks him to hand it over. It's for the truth, she says, signaling she's from Manticore. Having received help from them before, he has no choice but to give in. The scene shifts to Zurich, where a man stands in a room full of people who have been killed. Dahlia calls him and instructs that he, Davik, and his twin brother retrieve the Citadel X case in Miami. In Chicago, Bernard plays a deadly game with 3 people who are tied to chairs. When the first 2 don't tell him what he wants, the third reveals Dahlia's plan to get the nuclear codes in the Citadel X case. At that moment, a DNA match for Mason shows up on Bernard's phone, and he shoots the man dead. Kyle and his wife get hot and heavy in the bedroom, but he has flashes of Nadia again. He's unable to move even when his daughter Hendrix calls for him. The couple coax Hendrix, who had a nightmare, back to sleep. Unable to sleep himself, Kyle goes to shed and looks at the box of things he had with him on the train. He gets a call from Abby saying someone's in the house, so Kyle runs back but gets ambushed by Bernard. He makes them all get into a car at gunpoint. A gas leaks out that puts them all to sleep. In Miami, the assassin twins locate the Citadel X case while elsewhere. During an interview, Ambassador Dahlia passionately defends Britain and her actions. An assistant tells her the Davik brothers have the case and are en route to decoding it in New York. Bernard, his ex-wife Jo, and her new wife Sandra untie Kyle and Abby. Bernard tells him he's got them here for his safety before Manticore can get them. Bernard reveals Kyle's real identity as a spy, and he introduces Citadel as an agency of spies loyal to no nation who work for the safety of all people. until they were betrayed by one of their own who helped Manticore, an organization made by the wealthiest families in the world, destroy Citadel. Bernard now needs Mason to help him take back the X case. He reveals Mason used to work with Nadia, but assumes she's dead now. He promises to help Mason remember everything if he helps find the case. We flash back to 8 years ago where someone crawled out of the train's wreckage. It's Nadia! The next scene starts with a flashback. We see Nadia pull herself out of the water in Italy, where she manages to contact Bernard and tell him what happened. He's initiated a backstop, though, and tells her he had no other choice. Nearby, Nadia just manages to stop a car for help before she collapses. Nadia wakes up to find herself handcuffed to a bed. Her wound has been dressed, and a man with a gun sits watching her. When she realizes he means to keep her there, she manages to use his gun to break the handcuffs and fight him till he passes out. Something red flashes on her neck, and an announcement is heard saying, "Backstop is commencing." In the few seconds she has, Nadia writes the words, "Go to Valencia Asha" on her arm before she passes out. When she wakes up, she's shocked to see where she is. She takes her passport and the man's car keys and leaves. In Wyoming, Abby finds it hard to believe Kyle's a spy. Kyle tells Abby he just wants to keep her and Hendrix safe. Bernard arrives and tells him it's time, so Kyle says his goodbyes and they leave. Bernard takes Kyle to a building in New York City where he says the case is being decrypted at the top floor. He's hacked Kyle's biometrics to get him into the building. Bernard guides Kyle into the room with the case and even instructs him on how to fight a guard off. Kyle makes it back with the case and they leave. At Ambassador Dahlia's home, she gets a call from the Davik brothers who tell her the case was stolen by none other than Mason Kane. She tells them to bring both to her. Bernard tells Kyle to open the case using his wrist, and upon doing so, wants to use the case to find other active agents. Bernard reveals they aren't going back to Wyoming. They can't because Kyle is now a target for Manticore, something Bernard conveniently forgot to mention earlier. Kyle can only return to his family once Manticore is dealt with now. He then reveals what the backstop did and tells him to use the vial in the case with his name on it to get his memories back. Before he can do so, the Davik brothers shoot and hit Bernard. The car crashes to a stop and Kyle manages to take the case, get into another car and drive away. Kyle stops the car at a clearing and looks for the vial, but it's broken and the fluid has leaked. He screams in frustration, but the X case shows him it's located one active agent, Nadia Sinh, in Valencia, Spain. On his way to Valencia, Kyle leaves a message for Abby explaining what happened. He enters a restaurant and bumps against Nadia, but she doesn't remember who he is. When he mentions Italy, she takes him aside. She assumes he's talking about the man she killed, but he tells her everything about Citadel. As she denies it, he brings the X case close enough to identify her from her wrist. The Davik brothers enter the restaurant. Just as Mason tells Nadia about the vial, one of Davik's men shoots at them. Nadia knocks him out with a pan and they head outside the kitchen where they are ambushed by Davik. While they're both getting beaten, Nadia uses the vial. With her memories back, Nadia takes Davik down easily, and she helps Mason up too, telling him she remembers everything. Dahlia is annoyed when Davik tells her about Nadia. She tells Davik his gift is here, and as she sits down for dinner across the table from her is Bernard. Bernard being tortured by Dahlia's people. In Spain, Nadia drives herself and Mason to a Citadel safe house. She disabled the tracker on the Citadel X case so Davik can't follow. Mason asks her if he can trust her, and she says it's not the first time he's asked her that. While she dresses his bullet wound, she asks to hear about his family. He wants to know more about Mason, but she claims she wasn't close to him. They were together once, but it was brief. A flashback to Utah 10 years ago says otherwise. Mason reaches the Citadel U.S. headquarters where he hears from Bernard and another Citadel member named Grace that a deadly virus is about to be released by a man named Hassan. He's residing in the mountains in Iran, and since getting out of his missile-equipped fortress will be difficult, a new agent will be helping Mason. At the fortress, Mason blasts his way out with the package in hand. When he gets surrounded by the enemy, he jumps onto a dead paraglider to land below on the mountain. A ski chase lands him at the bottom of the mountain, and he's surrounded by ATVs, and out one of them comes Nadia. Mason is told she's the new agent, so Nadia activates a bomb and they fight everybody off, although Mason is in a bad way. Despite his injuries, Nadia gets them both out. Later at Citadel, Nadia introduces herself to Mason. Her mother was a Citadel spy and she herself joined 5 years ago. Mason claims he didn't need her help, but Nadia thinks otherwise. They come teasingly close to each other, and the next scene shows them sleeping together in Paris, 2 weeks after the event. Afterwards, they ask each other if they can be trusted. Back in the present, Nadia messages someone from a computer. They speak in code, mentioning a package that is waiting for Nadia. Meanwhile, Bernard and Dahlia chat. We find out that the two of them work together at the UN. She then threatens him into giving the 19-character password to a Citadel AI that tracks uranium around the world. When he refuses, she threatens his wife and daughter in Wyoming along with Mason's wife and daughter. In Wyoming, Abby tells Jo, Bernard's ex-wife, how she met Mason, Kyle to her, at a memory regaining program after she went through an accident. Dahlia continues to attack Citadel and its hypocritical codes of honor. When Bernard says she's wrong, she shows him a burn mark on her entire forearm. She then mentions having found a Carter Spence and implies torturing him. She then calls in a doctor who proceeds to torture Bernard by pulling out his teeth and later instructs Anders to continue hurting Bernard. He's about to drill right into Bernard's brain when Bernard says that Brielle, the woman Anders loved, is still alive. Mason speaks to Abby and tells her about meeting Nadia. Once he's done, Nadia tells Mason to go home and protect his family. He's of no use to her. He insists on staying, but when he mentions flashing lights in a sea of red, she asks him what he's talking about. He shows her the lights on the Citadel case and claims that the lights are calls for help. They see video messages from Carter Spence before Manticore closed in on him. The last one was from a place named Fez. Nadia figures Carter must be kept at a black site by a Portuguese crime boss called Balduino Basto. She was once tortured there herself. If they get to Balduino, they can save Carter. And how convenient for them that Mason Kane used to be tight with said crime boss. Mason gets ready to transform into his old self. He approaches Balduino with Nadia directing him from afar. He plays around with a lighter that has a transmitter in it, hacking into Balduino's phone as they chat. All he needs is time, so he stalls by asking Balduino to help with a mission. Balduino asks about his girlfriend Nadia and claims she's the one who sold out Citadel. Mason gets rattled, but the upload is complete and Nadia tells him to leave. Before things get messy, Mason grabs a gun and threatens Balduino's son so he can leave unscathed. In the car, he asks Nadia to explain what happened. She claims she wouldn't be doing all of this if she was the mole. He asks her why she didn't tell him about her and Mason being a thing, but she claims that was between her and the old Mason. Meanwhile, Anders gets Bernard his phone, and he pulls up a photo of Mason and his family. He tells Anders that the woman in the photo is Brielle, although she now goes by Abby. Bernard says that everything he knows is a lie. In Morocco at the Manticore Black site, where Mason and Nadia sneak their way in. They take out all the people inside, with Nadia taking the lead in the fighting. They find Carter Spence in a cell, but the twist is that he accuses Mason of being the reason all this is happening. A flashback to Paris 10 years ago shows Mason and Nadia chatting after their night together. Mason finds out he's not the only person she's come to Paris with, but he claims to be able to see through her masks now. Nadia says she's bringing a new Tier 1 to the team. Celeste Graham, a woman Nadia claims to trust since she saved her life. At the Citadel headquarters, Mason meets Celeste, who turns out to be none other than Abby. They discuss whether to send Celeste on a case dealing with the Cilia brothers. Anders apparently is creating something called an Oz key, which could take over an entire country's infrastructure. And Celeste is to go undercover and stop him. Mason and Nadia give her tips on going undercover. She goes to Amsterdam as Brielle and meets Anders. As per Mason's instructions, she believes her own lies to make the deception complete. Her mission is to get all the intel on the Oz key. Mason keeps checking in every week with her to keep her tethered to reality. In London, Nadia and Mason celebrate together after learning about one of the Cilia brothers' contacts. Then all of a sudden, it's been 3 months that Celeste has been dark with no contact. To top that, Mason found out Celeste's twin brother is a gambler and in a lot of debt. And the Oz key would bring Celeste more than enough money. He doesn't trust her and decides to send in an ops team. Meanwhile, Celeste swaps the Oz key with a fake one, but Davik sees her. He confronts her and they fight just as the ops team comes in. A staff member gives Mason an update. Celeste is alive, Anders is caught, and Davik isn't to be found. Nor is the Oz key. Mason exchanges cryptic texts with someone. Celeste and Anders are brought in. Mason interrogates Celeste but doesn't let Nadia in on it. The questioning doesn't go well. Celeste says she put the Oz key in her bag, but it turns out to not be the real thing. She says she left Davik in the basement, but he wasn't there. Mason threatens her brother's life to find out if she sold the Oz key, but is stopped midway by Nadia. Outside, Nadia and Mason argue. Nadia believes Celeste wholeheartedly and pushes to move her to a safe house, safe from Davik, for the meantime. Mason urges Grace and Carter to backstop Celeste as the best way of protecting Citadel. He says they can do it off-site so no one, not even Nadia, knows. And if she's innocent, they can just give her memories back. Grace agrees. They then feed Celeste a fake story about putting her through a procedure to change her cornea and fingertips to stop Davik from being able to find her. She agrees to go with them. Grace lies to Nadia and tells her that Celeste was sent to a safe house. Meanwhile, Mason finds a house for Celeste's new life. Later, he tells Bernard to destroy Celeste's original memories. Bernard warns Mason that if he does this and he's wrong, he can't come back from it. At the backstop facility in Mexico City, Celeste is sedated. Nadia thanks Mason for having her and Celeste's back. Afterwards, Mason and Carter discuss that there are no leads on the Oz key. Carter reveals that as the person who is in charge of all communication in Citadel, he found out that a Tier 1 agent sent the chief of the ops team a cloaked order to hide the Oz key and bring it to them personally. That order was from Nadia. This doesn't seem news to Mason, who, Carter claims, put suspicion on Celeste to take it away from the woman he loves. Back in the present, turns out Carter isn't accusing Mason. He's accusing Nadia. Carter telling Mason he can't trust Nadia. We flash back to Athens 9 years ago. Nadia pours them drinks while Mason looks at a small box in his hand. Nadia suggests bringing Celeste back now that Davik seems to have disappeared, but Mason dismisses the idea. Their current mission has them posing as a married couple. They've been told to bring back a Yakuza boss. Mason gives her the engagement ring from the box. She thinks it's from Bernard, but Mason reveals it's from him and asks her to marry him. In the present, Bernard uses Abby to convince Anders to get him out. He cuts the ropes on Bernard but suddenly gets shot by Dahlia. Bernard tells Dahlia that Thomas would be ashamed of who she's become. Dahlia says she's doing it all to protect people from losing their loved ones as she did. And it was, after all, a Citadel agent who betrayed the organization. Back to 9 years ago, Nadia gets a secure message from someone revealing the truth about Celeste. She goes to Bernard and asks him if Mason knew. When she meets Mason, she tests him by asking if he knew Bernard backstopped Celeste. He says no, but she reveals she knows everything. He claims he did it to protect Nadia as he knows she took the Oz key. Nadia says she took it and destroyed it because nobody deserves that power. She gets more frustrated when she realizes Mason deleted Celeste's memories from the system. They argue about whether Nadia's really invested in their relationship or not, and whether she shows her true self. She concludes that she can love, but she just can't love Mason. She leaves the ring and walks out. She meets the man, Rahi Gambir, outside where he hands her air tickets to Valencia. He tells her to be careful as she turns her back on Citadel, but she says no one suspects a thing. She also says Mason can never find out. At present, Carter reveals he knows Nadia met the terrorist Rahi Gambir days before Citadel fell. Dahlia threatens Bernard's family to make him give up the password to the Citadel nukes. After that, she orders her people to kill his family anyway. In Wyoming, Joe sees the incoming threat and the group of 5 get ready to leave. A body bag lies in Dahlia's mansion as she gets a call from Davik, who gives her the update on Nadia and Mason. She tells him to find and get Mason. Davik must also go to Valencia because they've picked up communication between Nadia and Rahi Gambir. She then casually mentions that Bernard killed Anders. Elsewhere, Nadia, Carter, and Mason argue. When Carter and Mason pressure her about Valencia, Nadia reveals she has a child. Back in the flashback when Nadia called Rahi, it was to tell him that she was pregnant. She didn't want Mason to know because she didn't trust him. At present, Nadia says she hasn't seen her daughter since she was 6 months old. Mason finds out the child is his daughter. In Washington, D.C., Dahlia meets with a woman named Christoph. She tells Dahlia the other families are pleased with Dahlia. Dahlia speaks with someone on the phone and reveals that despite having the codes, she still needs Mason's fingerprint to activate the nukes. Nadia tells the other two that Rahi Gambir is none other than her father. In the past, Grace calls Nadia for a mission in Italy. She decides to go to meet Mason and tell him the truth. She ties a small golden bracelet for her daughter Asha before leaving. In the present, a string of cars surrounds the Citadel party. A man steps out, hands Mason an earpiece and tells him someone wants to speak to him. It's Dahlia. She reveals she has his daughter. The man holds up the golden bracelet that Nadia had tied for her daughter. To save her, Mason must help Dahlia activate the nukes. The finale episode of Citadel Season 1 opens with a backstory to Mason joining the organization. It shows that a young Mason lost his father in Serbia, after which his mother left him too. He then used to live with his grandmother in Oregon, and without a parental backbone to his life, he felt lost. In a voiceover, Mason describes how Citadel gave him an identity after losing it relatively young. These sequences are closely cut with the child watching spy movies, getting inspired by how things operate in their world. The action moves to present-day Morocco City, where Dahlia's men have captured the trio of Carter, Mason, and Nadia, with Nadia and Mason's daughter as bait. Dahlia then explains her plan of flying over the Pacific, where the submarine is currently navigating, hacking into its system and bringing it to the surface. She further explains that Kyle, Mason, and Davik will make an airborne jump and retrieve the 5 nuclear cores from the missiles, bringing them to Christoph in Valencia for an exchange. Nadia wants to lead the mission, knowing that Mason is not currently equipped with the mental and strategic planning needed. She also doesn't want to put her daughter in danger, so she wishes to jump. However, Carter explains how it has to be Mason who will have to lead because when Nadia had abruptly left Citadel and went AWOL, Mason was assigned the Red Cell mission, and against orders, he locked the submarine using his bio-lock, making it impossible for anyone else to use it. We flash back to the Red Cell mission 8 years ago, where Mason is told to go to a Russian nuclear submarine and install access for Citadel in case the Russians decide to use it. Mason, who is frustrated with Nadia's absence, demands Grace tell him where she is if he is to go on this mission. A brief flash to the present sees Nadia and Carter instruct Mason on how to override the security in the submarine. Back in the past, Mason is dropped onto the submarine from a jet. He manages to have his biometrics put in the system but then switches his communication off and puts another device in the machine. He switches his comms back on and pretends nothing happened. At present, Carter locates the submarine. Mason asks Nadia why she didn't tell him about Asha, but she tells him this isn't the right time. Mason and Davik dive off the plane and land on the sub, with Mason having some trouble getting there. The machine accepts Mason's biometric and Davik decides he doesn't need Mason anymore. He pushes Mason's parachute, which pulls him away with the wind, and then cuts the cord. Nadia realizes something's wrong and decides to go down herself. She shoots Dahlia's other men when they try to stop her. Davik gets inside the submarine and calls Dahlia. He knows she killed his brother and has now used the missiles to target Manticore families instead. He tells Dahlia he wants a seat at the table. Carter manages to wake an unconscious Mason up. Dahlia retorts to Davik's threat by telling him that she controls the submarine's mechanisms and can drown him before the missiles do any damage. She cuts the call. Mason shows up, pointing a gun at Davik. Davik moves towards him, but Nadia intercepts and knocks him out. Carter tells Nadia that the only way to cancel the launch now is to get the nuclear cores. She grabs a temperature regulator that raises her temperature to the same as that inside the launch room. Any change in temperature will be detected and lock down the warheads. She enters the room and has 4 minutes to remove the cores from all 5 missiles. Meanwhile, Davik wakes up and knocks the gun out of Mason's hand. Nadia has 1 more core to go but is close to blacking out due to her raised temperature. Mason gets beat up by Davik. Carter reminds him that he doesn't need his memories for his skills. Those never left. Nadia manages to get the last core out. Thinking about his family, Mason's fighting skills spark into action, and he manages to take Davik out. He helps Nadia out of the launch room and gives her an injection that brings her body temperature back to normal. Just as Russian bombers are approaching, Mason and Nadia make it back to the plane. In the past, Mason comes back to Citadel headquarters. He tells Grace he used a secondary protocol to make sure he's the only one who can control the missiles. He will give Grace access in return for Nadia's location. Grace tells him he needs to get help. On the way to Valencia, Nadia and Carter discuss where the exchange of the cores will take place. Mason and Nadia head to meet Christoph, the woman from Manticore who once met Dahlia. Carter climbs into a sniper position behind them. Christoph and two men arrive. Above them, a man arrives on the overpass with Asha, holding the girl at the edge. They hand over the cores, but Christoph's man says they're encrypted. While they're arguing about how to decrypt them, Nadia tells Carter to take his shot. He shoots the man holding Asha. The girl falls, but Mason reaches in time to catch her while Nadia takes on the others. Christoph runs away without the bag of cores. Nadia tearfully reunites with her daughter. Back to 8 years ago, Bernard and Mason walk together, talking about Bernard's daughter. He then shows pictures of Nadia and Asha to Mason. He also gives him a round-trip ticket to Spain, but Mason isn't inclined to go seeing as Nadia clearly thought he wasn't a good father. Bernard tells him to go prove her wrong. At present, Asha asks Nadia about her grandfather. Nadia says he's tough and will find his way back. A woman goes up to Dahlia and tells her that Christoph didn't answer her call. Dahlia seems to expect repercussions. She leaves the house and it blows up as she drives away. At the Citadel headquarters, the three agents find the whole place in ruins. Hendrix and Abby are there too, and Mason reunites with them. Carter and Nadia are shocked to see Abby. In other news, Carter figures out how to bring Mason's memories back. Abby is hesitant, but Mason decides he wants to do it. Carter gives him the injection and all his memories come rushing back, landing Mason in shock. In the past, Bernard asks Mason how he knew where Nadia was. After all, he was the one who told Bernard where to look. We then see Mason meet with Dahlia. From their conversation, we realize that Dahlia is none other than Mason's mother. Mason's here to ask a favor. He wants to find Nadia. Dahlia agrees to find her. She then talks about what it's like to lose people you love. She describes the explosion in Serbia, how she saw her husband burn and was later treated with skin grafting. She became a different person, and so didn't return to her home or her son. She reveals Citadel was behind the bombing, hitting a UN facility of innocence by mistake instead of a terror cell. She encourages Mason to hand over Citadel's secrets and take them to court officially. We then see Dahlia transfer a list of agent names to someone to have them all killed. As the episode closes out, Abby asks Kyle if he remembers. He says he doesn't know, but Nadia watches the couple as they hug. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. I always love hearing from my viewers, so feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts on the video or any suggestions for future content. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.